Welcome to another episode of the Midwest Artisan. I'm your host, Andy Hingle.
And I'm your co-host, Dalton McCleary.
Dalton.
Yes.
Laravel built the thing. They
Yep.
built the thing.
They heard you. Or you heard them. I don't know if you're a secret spy in Laravel or not, but...
No. Yeah, I don't have any underlying... I have a lot of contacts there, talked to them, but there was nothing that I knew of that, some secret information. But personally, I'm very excited about this, and this has been like a personal journey for me to get logging to a great point. We've been kind of through the trenches of understanding a problem between our apps together, of trying to surface the how to even replicate to write a test for it, or to how to understand how they got there. So we've gotten very excited about Laravel Nightwatch. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure you might be living under a rock. So Nightwatch.
Go listen to the ROG podcast.
Yeah, Laracon AU, Jess Archer did a great talk there covering in full, but is essentially monitoring full service for your Laravel app. And I've been really curious on implementation, how they collect data. And on the recent version of the Laravel podcast, they kind of covered that with Mount Stauffer, so I'll link that in show notes, where Jess Archer says they have a process in the background of that will group in batches, like your requests. So that is really handy. So it's nothing like on the fly or live requests, or nothing that really impacts the server. So it's a process that lives outside of your application, which is really nice. Kind of similar to how like Blackfire, if you ever use that, works. It just kind of listens on the surface to everything that's happening. So I've been kind of curious with DigitalOcean. Obviously, this will be the background process, but something like Vapor and AWS, that'll be kind of tricky. They kind of touched on that podcast, how that they'll mostly be this background process, but I'm curious on Vapor, how they're going to do that. For example, on Vapor, when you generate PDFs, like we have a thing that takes screenshots of the site. It hides the footer, hides the header, and just takes screenshots of the content, generates PDF. That is really tricky to do in Vapor because it's all headless and or serverless, excuse me. But the actual generating, like being able to generate a browser to take the screenshots, we have to use Aaron Francis package. It's called Sidecar, and just like it basically attaches to Vapor and creates PDFs that way. So not to get too much on a tangent, but where I was going with this is like with Nightwatch, I'm kind of curious what they're going to do with Vapor, because Vapor is just a different animal, different beast of how to handle that.
Yeah.
So yeah, curious of your thoughts of Nightwatch, and did you watch the presentation?
I did get a chance to watch the Jess Archer and I guess Taylor's thing after the fact. I watched it on YouTube, and yeah, it's basically what you were describing months, or not even months ago. Like, I'm pretty sure you've had this idea since last Laracon, when we were talking after Aaron's talk, the very last talk of the second day. You're like, man, we need to build like this. At that point, it was like form logs. Like, how do you track form errors across a bunch of forms? And then that sort of ballooned into, well, let's just track everything. Why aren't we doing that? So this looks like a very fancy agency built version of what you were talking about, like almost word for word. And it looks nice. It's fast. It's exactly what I assumed it was going to be, some third party, Sentry-esque thing. I'm curious what the price is going to be for it. I know that they're trying to do like the pricing structure for cloud, but I'm very curious because like big sites, like there's a big site that you work on pretty consistently that I assume would balloon any data storage of, logs or errors or specific user logs and stuff. So I'm very curious what their pricing structure is going to be for storage, if that makes sense. That's probably where it'd make or break for me if I was going to use it or not, or pitch it as to a client to use. Like if it's less than $10 a month, that's not bad. But if we're talking like $5 extra for a gig, there are some clients that we use that would probably chew through that amount of data in a month or a week or something like that.
Some of the big clients I work with, I think at least the main one I'll be using, I can't wait to use this on. I don't think they'll have too many problems. Like if I said, hey, we're going to have, maybe a couple $100, if that tops, I think, just depending on the client. I think for those smaller clients, like you mentioned, they might be kind of fussy, if they get some higher website traffic than normal. And also they like to know the exact dollar amount that they're going to be expecting on their bill. So that's why we kind of favor DigitalOcean versus something like Vapor or AWS. So it might be kind of hard with this fluent pricing to get them to sign on, but I still think it'll be fairly affordable. Knowing Laravel, they seem to be developer first, at least with the cloud, and then with this now of they're going to make it as affordable as possible development wise on cloud. And I kind of think the same thing might be happening over at Nightwatch, but it'll be really interesting to see like pricing and where that goes. I'm currently doing this now on CloudWatch, AWS CloudWatch, and the fact with Nightwatch, there's a lot of watches going on, by the way, CloudWatch, Nightwatch. They're all like named similar. But,
you got to get that keyword in there, man.
Yeah, but beautiful application that they put together. But in CloudWatch, it's very clunky, very just AWS centric. Anytime you go on the AWS console, everything's clunky. It's kind of hard to find things. And so I built out this dashboard that has like exceptions tracking. We have a really rich logging system, so with context. And so I have to go and write in, I forget the name of it, but it's like AWS's querying language they have in CloudWatch to look up something, and it's very complicated just to look up like if context is this ID or if order ID is this, and it's very, very complex. And the fact that in Nightwatch you can click a user or surface to an email address, and it'll tell you all the requests, any exceptions they've got. And doing that in CloudWatch, you can do it, but you're going to really have your work cut out for you of getting that where it should be. And I feel like I'm only a quarter away of where I want it to be. And Nightwatch is all that way plus more. It includes like jobs and everything else that I really didn't. That it was kind of like, yeah, maybe someday, but jobs they're fine for what we have it. But just having it there and readily available, it is so cool. So really excited to see it, and it's one thing obviously to just see it. The demo is just amazing, just like all the data set they have, but then another to actually use it. So I really hope it lives up to it, and knowing the Laravel team and everything behind all the team that they have behind there, I feel like it's going to be a great product. So it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I've used this analogy before when talking to other developers. I feel like Laravel is really leaning into that Apple mentality. Like whenever people ask me what's the difference between Laravel and Symfony, I always like to say that Laravel was Apple and Symfony was Android. And I think they're really leaning into that Apple, like they're sweating all the small details. Everything's thought about. It looks just absolutely insanely gorgeous. Like I don't know how they can go wrong with the team that they have there. It looks great. The only thing that's holding me up is the pricing. You announced the pricing, and I'm in. I mean, I've already joined the wait list. I assume you as well.
Yeah.
But they're really leaning into that Apple stuff, and I love it.
Well, even Taylor with his presentation, he does it like Tim Cook style. He'll come out
exactly.
And say, "Hey, this is what we've done for the previous year." Next coming up, Jess Archer, and then he'll come back out at the end of the thing and just kind of plays that definite like that CEO ownership. So which is I love that you kind of compared like the Apple centric. I've heard a little bit about that, but the way you said that was great. Yeah, it's just everything's clean, everything's exactly what to expect, and that's how Apple works, and so it's really cool. I wanted to talk about, I put out a thing on Blue Sky, which, by the way, if you haven't joined Blue Sky already, I saw you join. So, but you definitely, if you have not, you should. Everyone from Twitter seems to be going over there.
I literally just joined like Friday. I think you sent me this particular thing that we're about to talk about on Blue Sky, and I was like, all right, well, if Andy's on there and he's posting stuff and getting good answers, I might as well join as well.
Yeah, well,
so
I was kind of surprised of like, I just joined Blue Sky a while ago, and then Justin Jackson was like, he's all about Blue Sky now. And then all of a sudden he put me in his Laravel list. and that it just happened to log in Blue Sky the other day. I was like 500 followers. I'm like, what? I haven't posted anything. So, and so yeah, it just kind of ballooned from there. And yeah, I really like it just because it feels like 2010 Twitter. There's no ads, at least of what I've seen. It may just be my ad blocker, but I haven't seen any ads. Everything's pretty straightforward. Like you have your following list. You're not getting politics, like at least very much crap on your feed. It's great. But anyway, I don't want to get off tangent of Blue Sky, but it's great. But I posted this question. I've been doing, like, if I post something on Twitter, I post on Blue Sky just to see, and I get by far getting a lot more conversation out of Blue Sky, and so that's what I'm liking more about it. But constructor property promotion, but setting it with a class. So, for example, if you do like public carbon date, and then it just automatically creates like a public carbon instance, or you do public carbon. Talking in code on a podcast is not helpful, by the way, but doing something
quite difficult.
Right. But just thinking like you have a new class, and at the top you want to write like a property, and just do like public carbon date equals new date, like new carbon, and then the date you want to give it to. And so I was trying to figure out some way to do this, because what was happening, I was writing like public carbon date at the top, and then in my constructor, I was writing inside the constructor, I was writing it again, like this date equals new carbon. And of course, there's the property promotion thing where you can give it to date, but you still have to, in the constructor, you still have to like, hey, new carbon. And I was like, there's got to be some way to do this, of like where we can do like an instantiation on the property declaration. Like, so when we set it up, we don't have to write it twice, or we don't have to write inside the constructor. It just works. So Travis Northcutt, which I did meet at Laracon, but I don't know if he remembers me, because it was very like in passing. Maybe so. We haven't really had the conversation about that yet, but it was like we kind of it was kind of in a group setting. But he replied saying he was kind of trying back and forth, and he was asking me if I could do it in a constructor promotion. So basically, you would write public function construct, then the properties will be inside the constructor. The opening, it would be public carbon start date. But then we found out if you type hinted it, it would not work. So we just kind of went back and forth, and he eventually he figured out, and I moved on to something else, because I was like, I couldn't figure this out. Maybe it's just not possible. So I went on to something else, and that just happened on Blue Sky later. Like, oh, he figured it out, and so he wrote a blog post on it, and which I'll link in the show notes. But if you write public construct and then open, right, and for a new public property, and you can do so public function construct, then inside there public date equals new carbon, and you can pass in your carbon object, and inside there you do have to call the constructor. You have the parent construct thing, or you get an exception. But I did not know you could do that, and so I remember messaging out to you before all that. I was like, do you know how to do this? And we kind of went back and forth. I was like, oh wait, maybe we found it. But the tricky thing is you cannot type hint it. If you do it, it'll reinitiate the new object. So it'll, like, if you pass in your new carbon and then open parentheses the date that you want, it'll just go for a blank new carbon object. So you can't type hint it, but you could just do public start date new carbon. So I'm like, this is great. I might be reaching for this a lot more.
All right. So. Yeah. I like it a lot. The type hinting is kind of a smell to me, because I really want the best of both worlds. So like dates, and I've tried to do this with like collections as well, like Laravel collections, and it doesn't work. And it always bugged me so much that you always had to put like specific types in the constructor, and you can have other types like strings, arrays, whatever, as just properties up there or in the declaration, and it's fine. Why doesn't date times do that? Why don't collections do that? And so it's weird that this workaround is basically just circumventing PHP. However, they do that constructor call where they're just instigating a new version of this, and instead of giving it the default value, they just don't give it any value unless you just don't type hint it. So that's... I'm curious how long it took him to figure that out, because that just seems like such a backwards way of thinking about trying to do this, that you have to. It's counterintuitive to what you think it would be, but it works. Yeah, it's impressive, if I'm being honest. He posted
the blog post, and then Joe Tannenbaum, he works at Laravel, he replied like, yeah, I didn't know you could do that. So, so I was like, oh shoot, like this is what kind of started that conversation. Like, are you supposed to do this? Probably not. Maybe that's cool, but eventually, I think as a language, we should get there where we can type in the constructor of what we're going to go to, where we're wanting to do, so we don't have to type it twice. So it goes back to my thing. I question everything. Like every line, I'm like, is this, because every line you're adding to the code base is something you have to maintain, and you're fighting the framework with your own business logic, which is fine. But you really should question: is this really needed? Should we utilize our framework tools that we already have for us? So that just kind of goes back to that, and that's where all that started. I'm like, is there a way to do this? Or it was kind of a wish list post, and just to see someone, I was like, yeah, you can do that. That was just really cool.
Yeah, I agree, and I think PHP should get there at some point. Like the fact that for years I've been writing like a new class instance. Like if I just want to declare a new class and call a method on it in like one line, you always had to wrap the new class name in parentheses and then pass your method or whatever to it. And in 8.4 you don't have to do that anymore. Right? You can just write new class and then just immediately chain your method call. I have a feeling or I have a hope that PHP like 8.5, 8.6 something or whatever does what you're describing and just lets you do public carbon, date equals today or whatever. And it just works out of the box. I'm really
like
hopeful.
A little helper
because,
today.
Yeah. Like that would just be, that would be a very Apple approach for PHP to do as a language. So I'm really hoping. I'm really hoping.
It'd be cool to at least just see the parent constructor go away, because one thing you have to do to make this work is you have to write that stupid like parent : construct, which in every code review I just can see like, why is this needed? Like especially on a class where you're not extending something and you see as parent construct. As somebody reviewing code, you probably see this and like, why are we doing that? And then you have to like realize, so it's just because we're calling objects that we need to keep the state above it. So yeah, that's kind of a smell, but at least get in that direction of removing that constructor. Basically, I would love to just get to a place where constructors are like you really have to go to links to reach for them. Like just being able to publicly call something easier. So yeah, which think about that kind of leads me to DTOs. One of the things I want to talk about as well is of DTOs, and I know I have some opinions on this because we don't have very many projects that have DTOs. And recently, you probably saw one of the projects I've introduced a couple of new DTOs. And so, in going back to the constructor, the DTOs, it has like every DTO. I see the static method of like from, like you go like. New user's bad example because it's usually a model, but like just an example here, but new user, and then you go colon from, and then you pass it like an array, and that from is typically a static method that instantiates the new user. I've been looking into more DTOs of just kind of whipping like these crazy arrays into shape and to actually having a meaningful objects. So one in particular I introduced recently. I think I can talk about this service because it's so globally known, but we were integrating with Salesforce, and their API is, when you work with their API, they give you everything when you call like an index. And so like, if you call an index of content, it gives you the related content, but not only that, inside that related content is reference of other content. So you're getting pretty much these huge, massive objects. And I was having to kind of wrangle that together. What I was trying to do is code it in a way that I'm looking for something inside the content. So it was just a mess to deal with in Laravel collections. So I created a DTO. Basically, I call like Salesforce response from, and I just give it the whole array, and then it takes that and then cleans it up. It creates into individual responses, and then inside that DTO class, here's the really cool part. I can call like has link in content, and so I can make a method on there. It just does a regular expression response. It handles all of that child. The cool thing I like about DTOs the most is you really can just give it anything. It's just a regular PHP class, and you can just wrangle it the way you want. But the really cool thing is like it can know, like with using Laravel collections, it can, if there's like an object inside there that was referencing another a collection object that exists elsewhere in your collection, you know what I mean? And you want to scale those down to make unique content. DTOs handles that wonderfully. You can clean it up and then use like Laravel's unique thing to clean up. Going a bit on into the weeds here, but I found DTOs really helpful in that way. And when I wrote that, I was like, wow, this felt really good. I really liked the DTO experience on that. And then I was wondering for other apps, like how I could utilize this more. And one app in particular that we worked on, we have a front end that is an inertia app, and then a back end, we need an API that plugs into a mobile app. And the way that we handle that, because we don't want to write the same request object twice, the same response object twice. So on the API and on the inertia front end, we have like a request object, a form request object, and we do the validation. And then when that validation is complete, we're still in the request object that passes to the controller. But then inside the controller, there's a method that we call from the request, like request arrow store. And then in the request object, it goes and stores that object. So that way, the storage is only written once. We call that store twice on the API in inertia. So it works. The only part that always has smelled funny to me, it just felt weird. I've never seen out in the wild like this. I haven't seen any other Laravel apps that do it this way. They usually reach for DTOs. And now I get it. I see why. So I kind of painted the picture here for just kind of the setup, and at least for in DTOs, you would essentially, when it hits the request object, you would say from this request, create this DTO object, then turn on, save it. It's kind of a wash if you could do it either through a request or through a DTO. You're practically writing the same, but I talk about how much I hate abstractions. So, but anyway, I'm curious of your thoughts. Like, have you dealt with DTOs? Pros and cons of like what I'm explaining here, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of competing thoughts about DTOs from past experiences with sort of passing a lot of data or big chunks of data around. But I want to preface this by saying I don't think I've done a DTO in Laravel in a really long time. So I'm a bit shaky on that, but using DTOs in Symfony has always been not nice from my experiences. There's a site that I maintain that's quite large. It's a quite large Symfony site, and it's got like a React front end for like inventory stuff. And it used to use a lot of DTOs, and it was kind of a pain to go through two layers of something to try to find what I was wanting. Like why couldn't I just go to the Symfony entity and just get it there? Like it doesn't have to be anything crazy. But I don't know if it's whoever originally built the site built these DTOs, but they were unnecessary. It was unnecessary file, unnecessary like extra hoop I always had to jump through. I prefer to just go straight to the source if possible. But what you're describing makes sense. I mean, especially from the site that we're talking about in general, right? Like you have a whole front end and a whole mobile app. You'd hate to write the same thing twice, because if you have a bug in one spot, you'll have a bug in the second spot, and it's annoying to try to find. So I think you may have convinced me that the way that you did it is a good version for DTOs. I can't see any other site that I've done so far that would benefit from explicitly writing a DTO for it. So I don't know. The smeller in me is like it's just unnecessary layer. You could either put it in the model, you could put it in the controller, you can make some trait that does these kinds of things for you. I don't know. I don't personally find myself ever reaching for DTOs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. What got me thinking about it was about a year ago. Ian Landsman from the show Mostly Technical with Aaron. Ian was talking about how much he loves DTOs, and he gave an example where you have where he was talking about a user, and and just spinning up the user and being able to handle it and maneuver through it. And the whole time I'm thinking like, okay, it's a user. It's probably a user model. You could just do a fat model and be done with it. You don't have to have this abstraction on with your model of like maybe. So that's what I was thinking. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand DTOs, but when it makes sense to me is when it's outside the eloquent model space of like you're wrangling Apple API and any type of Apple's APIs that they have, and then Salesforce APIs. At least those are a couple of examples where they give you so much stuff you don't really care about, and then just way too much information you have to sort through. Like I was talking about, just trying to get simple information out, you really have to wrangle it together. That's where DTOs make sense. And then if you're doing something where you're doing an action on a model, sure, you just make a method on the model. Then there's this whole thing of like Laravel actions. That's been kind of a hot thing lately. I've been hearing more about like just having like inside your app directories actions. It just does all sorts of like things that across your app. It just handles everything. There's a way of doing that. So there's just that's why I like to say multiple ways to skin the cat, right? So. But I think just the easiest way that makes sense into reading the code, just understand how it works. What I love about DTOs as well is they're so easy to test because you could just test the objects themselves. You could just give them the data, the fake data inside the test, and then call the method and make sure you're getting the right result. And so like in that aspect. And Jacob Bennett recommended, he sent me this Bati package called Laravel Data, which is kind of on top of DTOs. Yeah,
of course.
Bati always has a package for everything.
Of course.
Yeah. But basically what that allows you to do is instead of writing that dumb thing of like to array or to collection, Spotty has all that ready for you. And so you just do like class user, like DTO extends data and coming from the Spotty package. And it handles a lot of the cruff work. You don't have to, all the export you want to do, like if you want to, like I said, export out to a collection or whatever you want to do, all the Laravel centric things, they make it really easy. So might look into further doing something like that just to kind of keep it clean if I reach for more for DTOs. But yeah, I thought about refactoring my request pattern because it's always smelled funny to me, but I don't know, it's a lot. That is a lot to do. So of just doing this DTO thing. I think for something like that, maybe the actions thing does make more sense. But yeah, just something that I've been curious of. DTOs is not something that Laravel talks about. It's just kind of a programming concept that you reach for when it's necessary. But I feel like you hear about it more and more for large applications that really need to wrangle heavy data sets. So
yeah, I've got a few follow-up questions for you. So like there's been a couple of things that I've worked on that were very API heavy, like third party. Let's go get some data, format it, and save it. And in that project, we used resources, right? Like a model resource. And so you just give it the model, give it the data, and then it spit out, a formatted version of that. What would be your opinion on using something like resources versus a DTO?
Yeah, that's a good one. Because resources, you can either have a collection or one specific resource. Generally, resources, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're kind of centralized around a model, right? Like you call a resource, you pass it an object, and it kind of circulates that either through a collection of that same object or that same model. That'd be maybe the only thing. I might be wrong on that. I think you probably do more with resources. I would expect like if you call a resource : like new or whatever, but it works. It doesn't have to be a eloquent collection.
That's why my question is I don't really know if there is an answer or a right answer. I just, from what I've seen, that's what we were using for a third party, like heavy third party, a bunch of APIs. They would, well, I guess maybe because we were just saving them, right? We want to pull in all of the data and sort of standardize it across a bunch of APIs and then save it to a model. So I guess that's why we used model resources. You feed it in this data, and you had a special, we had special formatters and handlers on that resource object based on whatever API you're working in. And it was just a whole lot easier to go, okay, here's a resource. It's a collection of these standardized objects. We can go ahead and just do, a mass insert with that resource. So that's why I assume that'd probably be the only time that I've ever worked or on something that's that big that I would have reached for a DTO besides a resource.
Right.
And that's been years ago. So that's why I'm curious on pick one or the other. Seems to be just preference.
I just went to their docs, Laravel's docs, and resources is actually listed under Eloquent API resources. So, which I understand why you would use it for an API, but I was kind of like confused of like, why is it here? Like under API resources, because there's been plenty of times I've just used it on the front end outside of API stuff, or perhaps I want to clean something for front end usage. Without getting too off topic, but with how like resources work primarily, but I was kind of confused by that. But yeah, it's kind of like you kind of wonder inside this resource, why is it, just pop in an object like storage? It seems to be very centralized around a model, at least everything in here versus just giving it some generic data.
All right, well then I think we've sleuthed it out then. If you're looking at maybe storing it into a model, maybe that's why we're using resources so much. Okay, fair enough. I'm very ignorant when it comes to DTOs. There's so many ways.
Gosh, now there's another way, because good point. Because there's the model resources. There's Laravel Actions, which Streese from Laravel is big about that. There's several big people that have been all about use actions for everything. I guess it just kind of depends on your application needs, honestly. But even something like this, I wrote it this way. That's kind of obscure. It's not really that popular. I should probably think about that. We haven't got any like question marks on it yet. It's between me and you. But it's like I wonder if we ever get somebody else in the project, if they're like, why is this in the request class? Like, why are you storing it in the request? I get that take on it. But then it's just like, well, it's because it's the easiest place without having to write some abstraction on top of that. But it's tricky.
Very hot button topic you've added here. Yeah. I'm curious on if anybody else is listening has heavy opinions on DTOs, just in general, or DTOs in Laravel. I'm curious. Let us know.
That's what I was trying to get a feel on as well, like the community. Like the gauge of things, of like which way they go is generally the way I like to do things. Like if most people favor DTOs, if that's kind of how you traditionally do it, I'd probably lean into DTO or versus like an action thing or whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of curious as well if you know a pattern how to handle this. Basically, what I'm trying to understand is you have a like I mentioned earlier, you have API, and then you have like a front end, inertia front end. And you write request store or some way to store that object. How do you write that once, not twice in two controllers? How do you write that once? And where is that state? Where is that at? Is it in request, action, DTO? It's tricky.
Here's your interview question: is you have to write this as dry as possible,
dude.
Right?
That's actually a really good interview question. Like if we're hiring somebody, I might pop that in. Like.
Here's a concept. Keep it at literally as dry as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, because there is no right or wrong answer. I'm just kind of curious of their beliefs to make sure that, just kind of get a good understanding of how they would fit culturally, just make sure I have a good understanding of how they would feel about something like that. So, yeah.
And if they ask what dry is, then next. Oopsie.
So speaking of, I've seen a lot about people using AI for when they're actually in an interview and handling that. But just kind of a transition here to like how often. I've been kind of curious. How often are you using ChatGPT versus Claude for actually like getting code? Like if you, hey, this isn't working, help me out, kind of thing. Like what would you recommend? Have you been doing that with either ChatGPT or Claude?
I haven't been doing it with Claude, but I try to stay away from ChatGPT, like asking it for a code example, like a code snippet. So like, hey, I need to write a function that does this, and then it sort of spits out a whole big long thing. I try to avoid that if I can, but if I can't, it's always a good starting point. It's never a good finishing point in my experience. But I use a lot of GitHub Copilot more than anything. Like if I'm stuck, I will literally just comment line, explain what I'm trying to do, and then, I mean, it basically does the same thing as ChatGPT. It spits out a snippet for me to look at, and then I'll be like, oh, I could use this, and then I'll rewrite that snippet. But
Yeah.
I'm always very, very leery of anything it just automatically spits out, including
Oh,
tests.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. The reason I asked that is a lot of people have been, not a lot, but I've seen a lot of traction on Cursor, which is like
I've heard of that, yeah.
it's like an extension of VS Code, and it has a bunch of AI stuff. Like you can do multi-cursor stuff, but then it kind of goes back to like, I personally haven't used a lot of ChatGPT and Claude, like with code generation. Usually I just, I do use Copilot, GitHub Copilot. I do use that, but for actual just like, hey, what's wrong with this code? I've seen some screenshots of people having them walk through the code. I've seen a lot of for juniors especially, but you see the reverse of that, how it's terribly wrong. And there's already a bunch of articles out there of that happening. But I was just kind of curious of your take, of like, because you're just if you've been seeing that with Cursor, or if you've been using any chat generated or ChatGPT generated code. I haven't, so I was just kind of curious. But
yeah,
I feel like
ironically,
one day it's going to be helpful. But
well, one day, hopefully. Ironically, I've been using it. The most recent time I've used it was I was working on a WordPress plugin, and I don't work on a lot of WordPress plugins, so I'm like, I don't, how can I clear the cache of a post? Like, how do I do that? Because no offense, I couldn't find it in Google search. So I was like, I'll just ask ChatGPT, and it was like, oh yeah, you call this method, and I was like, I didn't know that method existed, and then I could just Google search that method and find out, oh, I could just pass it the post ID, and boom, it clears my cache for me. Same way with like advanced custom fields. I didn't know you could clear the cache for a specific or a specific column of that until I asked ChatGPT. So I think that's probably the only 2 times it's actually like, oh, been really helpful for me. And that was probably a month ago. And I don't think I've used it since, other than just, normal Copilot stuff.
so yeah, that's really interesting. That's a good way, because like I feel like any problem I've had Googling WordPress, it's always install this plugin and resolve your issues.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I'm trying to not, because to install a plugin, I have to like go research this plugin and really depend that they're not gonna expose something, or there's a lot of issues with that. But then so that's really helpful in that. So I think for me, like the only thing I use ChatGPT for code wise is for when I'm trying to name a method. I can't just think of when I'm having a really hard time naming a method. I'm like, I kind of give it the context. I'm like, give me your 10 best names, and you really have to tell it to you have to give it very specific, because otherwise it's just going to start writing the implementation. I'm like, no, I just want the name. I know how to code it. I just want the name. and so that's really helpful. Because I like my methods really clean. I don't typically I just like them to be 1 or 2 words at most. Not something that for example, like what I had to do recently was taking all of the download counts from Apple, from Apple, and then store them. But just like, how do I have a method that names that, like store? I'm like, no, you just have to go through. But just writing something in there gives you a lot of different options. It's never perfect, but at least gives your brain going like, oh, I could take this and then come up with my own. So been doing that. And then when I'm in TypeScript, just generating types, that has been so helpful, of like just giving it an example of a JSON response, like, hey, I have this, I'm wanting it to add types to this. Here's what I have so far, and it's been spectacular at that. So that's one thing where Copilot kind of fell short of. It'll try to guess at, like, it doesn't do a very good job of trying to guess because it doesn't have the full context. But for some reason, ChatGPT, it just knows everything. It's just like, oh, I think at least it's going to go in this direction. Pretty much from my JSON response prompt, but it's been really helpful.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start using it that way. If I was just logging into ChatGPT to look at my history, and more often than not, a lot of the things that I ask ChatGPT are other words for certain things, and I didn't even realize that I was doing that. And now I'm going to start doing that with like methods. Like I have the same problem. I think we talked about it before. Like one of the hardest things ever to do in programming is to name something, like any variable, any method name, because like you can't just name it anything. It's got to be.
Right.
I've got to know what it is at first glance. So I'm actually going to start. I'm going to start using that way. It looks like I've already have. I literally just went back. My past 7 days were like alternative words for this word, or synonyms for this word, trying to name other things. But that's interesting.
Yeah, usually that, and usually when I get something back from clients, like we're lawyers, firm clients, they say, "Hey, update our privacy policy." There's some big wordy things in there, and I'm like, "Hey, ChatGPT, what does this mean?" Just to make sure that like because we're installing the privacy policy for them, just kind of making sure that we're kind of all on the same page. So, but yeah, it's because that's where ChatGPT is really good. But yeah, AI is not very great on content. So, but one thing that is good is actually using AI in Laravel, and so. And I know you had a lot of that going on lately. You've been doing all sorts of fun with just generating AI. So been kind of curious what you've been up to.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it as general as possible. But yeah, here in the last month or so, I've been actually getting quite big into using APIs like for AIs, like Open API and things of that nature. And it does get my brain moving of like past projects or certain like concepts of like how could I use AI to just make this a little bit better. And I know the whole like South Park meme of they took our jobs, and I definitely don't want to take my own job away by using AI, but like there are some really interesting things that I didn't think about using. Like whenever you think about like, oh, let's add AI to this project, it's usually something stupid like a chat bot. Or that's basically pretty much always it is, right? You give it some sort of knowledge base of like, hey, if a customer asks this, follow up with this type of response, et cetera, et cetera. Can't figure it out. Here's the number to call an actual human. That's usually what a bunch of people think about when like, let's add AI to this thing. But there's been a couple other things that I've been working on, again, no specifics, that are like, ooh, that's actually a really, really good idea. Like one of the things that I saw that I just, for some reason, my dumb brain didn't figure it out was like chaining different AIs on top of each other. Like if you wanted, let's say like you just created a new package and you wanted a video to post to explain what the package is. But let's say you hate the way that you look and you hate the way that you sound. It's a pretty real fear that most of us have. So you could, maybe you make an AI avatar and have it explain the product to somebody. So you would you give it like a transcript, and then this sort of video would be generated of somebody saying that transcript. Now you think, oh, done. But what if you used the other API, which is like a text to speech or a speech to text API, and made captions for that YouTube video automatically? So now you have a video and captions for it, and you just use two APIs. It's like the idea of chaining multiple things together to make like what a normal human would do. Like you'd think, oh, I just use AI and it'll do this one simple task for me. Well, you can have it do that one simple task, but you can chain on those simple tasks together, and it actually makes a pretty convincing like end product.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, I've been using a lot of that, like thinking of, oh, how can I chain little simple AI requests together to make like a project requirement work. Mm-hmm. And I'm very curious on like in your past experiences with the projects that we've built here. Do you see like is there an opportunity for a little? I'm gonna call it just a little sprinkle of AI anywhere. Like one of the examples that I had was auto generating captions for videos. There's sometimes a lot of videos that clients will give us. And the accessible ways to have captions for them, and they might not provide captions because it sucks, right? It sucks to write, and you have to time it all out. What if you could just give that video to AI and it spits out your captions for you, much like this podcast does on Riverside, right? AI generated captions or AI generated alt texts for images. Like you've posted a new page, and the client didn't write alt text. Spit that through AI, ChatGPT, bing, bang, boom, here's all your alt texts, et cetera, et cetera. What's your thoughts?
Like every AI idea that's come my way, at least, I'm just like, yeah, maybe. Some are just so far out there of it's it sounds near impossible, like to do something really neat. And some of it is, it's simple, but then it's like for the profitability standpoint from a agency space, it's like we can build this, but would a client pay for it? No. Yeah. So we're trying to, as an agency, we're trying to find that middle ground. What can we do? Right. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm glad you brought it up. And one thing I've been wanting to do and spend some time with is just taking a deep dive. And the example I would love to use is to leverage AI to analyze a data set, like a provided CSV, and extract like insights and trends. Specifically, like we have so many of our clients, we have a contact form, or we have like some way for them to reach out, kind of like a ticketing system. And Zendesk, other platforms, the ticketing systems, they already might have something in the works of, even in Lensman, I think he's doing something to kind of doing like this AI trend thing. But just basically take a CSV export. You have title, description, and timestamp, right? You have 3 columns, and just look through all of it. Just tell me insights and trends. What do I need to know about? Like, what are some trends and things? Obviously, I could pipe this into ChatGPT, and it just tells me the result, whatever. You know, they have like a little data tool, sure. But like, I'm trying to think more broad than that. Many of ChatGPT is public. So with that, I was kind of setting some requirements of like personal requirements for myself. Like some of the requirements should be able to query the model. Like tell me the top 10 types of submissions this year, right? I also want the model or the service, whatever it is, to operate privately. So no data public sharing, or ensuring that none of the data I provide materializes or shared data with, or that they learn from it. That's available to anybody, So and then some way to like upload the CSV somehow. It's always been tricky. You always have to write this stupid like Python script or whatever, do a loop saying like, just giving instructions like, you are a bot, and this entry is a submission for a contact form. Please remember it to query in the future. And then title, blah, blah, you just have to write a loop to go through that. And that's how I kind of train it. But I would just like, I guess I had just more old school. I just like upload CSV, click, and it's there. But that's just how databases work. But it's not practical. I get it. But just some way to do something like that. And some way to query it. So with this model, I've seen some of these that are like some of these have great promises, like OpenAI, stuff like that. They have great APIs, but then some of the other ones, it's like Olama. That's one I've been looking at. It's more private. Just being able. One of the requirements I would love is the ability to query over like a REST API or HTTP API. A lot of these you have to go to the command line and punch it in. So something like that. Yeah, so there's a lot of requirements to this, and I wanted to avoid using tools that fights with the recommended defaults. Like I don't want to write this in PHP. If their documentation's in Python, like I need to go, right. I need to write in Python. I'm just trying to prevent any personal preferences in here, just to have a fresh, open mind about this thing. And then, I think my main thing is just kind of to embrace open source on this. What's that? What's that site that has all the public?
Hugging Face?
Hugging Face, yeah. Hugging Face. Like, there's so many great models on there. Just to utilize some of those. There's even data sets. So you can even probably, for the example I gave, pulling a CSV, you could probably pull something from the data set. I saw somebody had like the Titanic survivors and their age, and maybe something like that for fun, But yeah, so that, anyway, to answer your question, I don't know, I went way too long on that. And to answer your question, we have so many clients that have these customer or these contact forms. I think I could get a few of them to bite on AI to understand the trends of what people are writing in about. There's one client in particularly that I'm thinking about would love something like this because they're very They're very like pen and paper. Somebody writes in, it's to an email address. They just respond. They don't really know much about that, and they kind of have an idea. So,
Okay. Interesting thoughts. Yeah, what you said was actually quite. I hadn't thought of trying to like analyze data, even though that's sort of what ChatGPT is. In the background, it takes a lot of data from past experiences, analyzes it, and then gives you a response to whatever you requested based on what it was called. So I see a lot of like, maybe there's some filament widgets you could have AI generate, top users in your e-commerce store that are most likely to buy, at a specific time of year. Might be a good AI widget or something. And one of the things that I was thinking of doing, there's a recent project that we're about to start. That was like, how can we use AI to sort of help us test the project itself? Because the project it's very bare bones, it's pretty skeleton-like, and there's rules and there's boundaries. But you can have users come in, and it's a site of like a bunch of user-generated content. Like users are going to come in here and build any sort of combination you could possibly imagine of XYZ. Could we have AI write, 100 possibilities on the fly, spit it into a test suite, and test those 100 possibilities? And like each deployment, I know this kind of sucks, but just bear with me. Like each deployment is 100 new scenarios, like of quote unquote users coming in and using the site and generating a bunch of combinations of data. It's sort of what fake is, but like it's AI generated. So you don't have to like write it all yourself. You don't have to write, for 100 cases, I want to do, this combination. I want this person to generate this, that person to generate that. You just sort of have AI write it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's possible. Like I don't think that's a realistic vision, but I would love for something like that to happen. Like a user generated test. Like a real world user. Like here's somebody's name, here's their age, here's their demographic, here's what they like. Can you spit out like a profile for that person and then use the site as that person?
As that person.
And tell me if it sucks. Like that's what I would love for it to. I would love for that to be a thing. I don't think it's gonna be a thing soon, unless somebody's like wicked smart.
Yeah, I don't really know in our lifetime. But that would be pretty sick. Like to browse a website and understand their point of view from their culture. So
yeah, like I want 64-year-old Dolores to use this site, and then I want 21-year-old Nicholas to use this site. Like obviously those two people are going to use the site 100% different from each other. And obviously not age shaming, but Dolores might need more accessibility feature. Things like alt text and auto captions, whereas 21-year-old Nicholas
bigger buttons
won't. So yeah, I'm dipping my toes into it a lot more, or more and more, and it's. I don't want to like what's the phrase I'm looking for? I don't want to jump ship too early. Like I see AI is good, but I also don't want it to just take over absolutely everything, because that makes my eyes roll when I see something that's like, oh, look, we've got AI, and it's a dumb chat thing again. Like I hate that. Like let's use AI for like some actually good stuff here.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's sort of my tangent on AI in general. There's some good packages for Laravel. Like there's an open AI package for Laravel that I use that's pretty good.
TJ Miller's putting out really good stuff for AI.
Is he?
Yeah, so yeah, he has a package coming out as well. Yeah, or he had a package that was just released. You can use multi-models, kind of what you're explaining. So it was really neat.
Oh, hey now.
But yeah, I'm really curious where it's gonna go, just because it's just so complex, and but also I haven't seen anybody, at least in the Laravel space, I haven't seen anyone that has been using it in a meaningful way at least for agencies. And not just in Laravel, but just in general. Like as an agency, how can we utilize this outside of us? Like we use it often, but our customers or our clients are asking of like, hey, we've been to this AI seminar, we are all in. How can we do this? And we're like, if you have an idea, let us know. So, but we're really trying to turn that around of coming up with the ideas for our clients. And so I just haven't seen. I've just been trying to think of stuff like that, like getting insights on your stuff on your site, and
yeah.
And then I think as a Laravel developer, there's some space, and maybe this could be something with Nightwatch in the future, but of like, hey, we notice your database is underperforming. You should add an index to this column. Like, oh, that's helpful. You know, just something to that effect of just help maybe pointing us in the right direction of what they recommend. I feel like we might see that definitely in the next coming years, but just with tech advancements. But yeah, just trying to find that line of what's practical to put our time into, and what would businesses bite on, companies bite on.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, careful, Andy. Don't say too many more like feature ideas or whatever for Nightwatch, because they're gonna take them again. Okay, shh. Keep them to yourself. build a package for it.
Yeah, building something like that would just be insane. It would have been, because I was really like wanting that, and it was, I'm definitely a person to scratch our own itch, but that was just something that was just so large I couldn't even envision the scale. Mostly for the storage aspect, I couldn't get that. I couldn't wrap my head around that, at least by myself, you know. And so I'm really excited to see the product and where they're going to go with it. So.
Yeah. So Laravel, if you're listening, make sure you bump Andy Hinkle and Dalton McCleary on that wait list towards the top, please and spanks.
Yeah. All right, man. I've actually got to run here soon, so we might have to wrap it up and call it a show. Would you like to wrap?
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Midwest Artisan. You can find us on Twitter and on Blue Sky now. If you wanted to leave a comment, let us know about anything we missed. What's your opinion on DTO? Are you on the Laravel Nightwatch waitlist? And if so, are you below me or Andy? Because if you are, yay. If you're not, can I get in front of you? Can I please cut your line? I would love to use Nightwatch today. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.